Continuing education knows that at the end of the day, students want to graduate, and we can help them do that because we really listen to their needs, and we can offer them flexible options both within continuing education and across the campus.
We don't take a cookie cutter approach. We realize each student comes with their own story. So whether it's a part-time student looking to complete a degree program or someone just looking for online courses, we're there to connect them to the resources of the university.
Good morning, everyone. This morning's discussion is looking at the world through the lens of world-renowned filmmaker Charles Burnett. And I am joined here this morning with Charles Burnett, my mother, who is calling on my phone right now, who I will ask to check in with me a little later, and Maya Cade, who I'm a big fan of, and so I'm very happy that we had a chance to meet at this event today. My name is Leah Aldridge. I am an assistant professor of film and media studies and screenwriting at Chapman University in Southern California, Orange more specifically, and it is my pleasure to be here to facilitate this conversation. I'm going to allow the honorees here to introduce themselves, and I guess I have to push the off button, right?
Excuse me. Hi, my name is Charles Burnett. I'm a filmmaker, and Does this sound better? Yeah. Okay. I've been using these things for a long time, and each time it's like new, whatever it is. I don't know. But anyway, yeah, I'm Charles Burnett, and I'm here to address any issues you have, to talk to you, whatever it is, and that's it. Yeah.
Hi, I'm Maya Cade. I'm the creator and curator of Black Film Archive, which is a digital archive of Black cinema from 1898 to 1999. I'm also the incoming president of Milestone Films, which is the distribution home of Charles Burnett's independent films. In my personal time, I also have the honor of being Charles Burnett's archivist. So I'm really excited to dig in today. And I guess I can also say that Black Film Archive came into existence out of a need, not institutional support. So it's something that I fully created on my own. I'm also a film curator. I've curated at the Academy Museum, Museum of Modern Art in New York, and many other places.
Very nice. This is going to be. Can you hear me, Chris? All right, awesome. Okay, so why don't we, right off the bat, I have some questions, and then I believe we're going to open it up near the end for questions from the floor. So that's right, Skinner? Okay, because I could talk all morning, but anyway. Maya, why don't we start with how the Black Film Archive came into existence, and how it's grown, and its popularity. I know I use it all the time as a researcher.
At the time of Black Film Archive's existence, which turns 5 later this year, which is kind of insane for me to think about, Black Film Archive came to be after I'm a tweeter, as many people are, and Black Film Archive came to be during the George Floyd protest. And during those protests, people kept saying things like, all Black films are racist. All Black films are, they can't hold the weight of Blackness. There's never been a film to do that. And it's not in my position to shame people for their opinion. I don't think that is, honestly, online, there's so many things that shame people for the lack of knowledge that they have. So for me, the question was only, how do I build a bridge to give them better knowledge? And at first, it started as a tweet thread. I was just tweeting, Black films that are kind of under-discussed. The other thing to note is that people were talking about the same 12 Black films. They were talking about 12 Years a Slave, et cetera, insert thing here. They were just insinuating that all the filmmaking had to offer blackness was depictions of slavery, depictions of trauma per se. And I, instead of, again, shaming them, I tried to offer something else. Quickly, that Twitter thread, which went viral, I had an inclination that I should be doing more. So I took about a year so I started the Twitter thread in June 2020, and then Black Film Archive, the website, launched in August 2021. And upon launch, I started before I worked at the Criterion Collection, and then upon launch, I was working at Criterion, which is a home video distributor. And it went viral. I mean, it went beyond anything I could have imagined. And the number one question I was asked is, where is Killer Sheep? That was the most asked question upon launch. That people were saying, how can you have an archive of Black cinema and not include Killer Sheep?
Who were the people that were asking about Killer? I mean, was it people at church? Was it people at school? Or were there people who...
I mean, any person who wrote me for the first few weeks, because at the time, Killer Sheep was not restored, and there were music issues around the film, which we can get into too, and so it wasn't playing, and everyone was like, well, how can you have this archive of Black cinema and not include one of the most important films of all time? And it was a great question. And, life comes full circle because, eventually I left Criterion and I became a scholar in residence at the Library of Congress, and eventually made my way to working on the restoration of Killer Sheep, which is now restored and out in the world. And now I'm the film distributor of Killer Sheep as well. So life comes full circle.
That's amazing. And because we all want to know what happened to Killer Sheep, right? Like, so, Mr. Burnett, if you wouldn't mind telling us the truth, because there's a lot of mythology out there about why, the film was finished, but then it didn't get distribution. So maybe you can tell us a little bit about what happened with the film.
I'll try. One of the things is I made Killer Sheep. Yes, it is. The green light is on. I made it as a student film at UCLA. It was my thesis film, and it's still not working.
Just bring it closer to you now.
Okay, I'll get closer to it too. And my computer doesn't work either, so everything. So
No, I can't move that much.
that's it. Okay, I'll try again. Killer Sheep was my thesis film, and it was made right after, pretty close to the end of the civil rights movement, so to speak, and at the same time there were these black exploitation films being distributed, and so I was trying to make a film that would speak to the community that I live in, and because people were asking, well, what do black people need? Because they had all these different ideas from looking at these different films, like like the black exploitation films. They got a different picture of the kind of community I live in, and so we were always asked, what's it like living in the black community? Because they had these different ideas that we were poor, and I remember going to a festival in Hawaii, and after the film was, after Killer Sheep, not Killer Sheep, The Sleep with Anger. Excuse me. The Sleep with Anger was playing in Hawaii, and after the screening, a lady got up and said, a white lady got up and said, "I didn't know black people had washing machines." No, yeah, but you get questions like that because they don't see anything other than like drug dealers and things like that, and all these things that don't represent the black community, and so we were arguing about films like Birth of a Nation, which is considered an art film, and Birth of a Nation took place during Reconstruction, and that was one of the most progressive periods in American history, and they cheapened it by having, people who were like in Congress for the first time, built schools and banks and so forth, as people who, they were in Congress with their feet on the desk and eating chicken and stuff like that. Really a negative view of who we are and who we could be, and we were taught at school that this was a great film, it was an art film, and it shamed all of us because we didn't act like that. You know, we had places progressive areas like Utah and white Black Wall Street and things like that, which we created a capital for this country. You know, and so but the only thing they chose is something that made us look like buffoons and things like that, and that was the only thing they screened. And so when we were students there, we were trying to compensate for those gross errors that they presented who we are when we were. And so when we were students at UCLA, we sort of helped each other make films, and worked on each other's films. And one of the things that we were trying to do was correct those negative images. And so that's what our goal was. That's where LA Rebellion, the idea of LA Rebellion came from, was responding to Hollywood films. You know, and the problem was black people couldn't make their films. You know, and you know, they had people who didn't live in a community who were making films about black people, the black experience, and people of color. And so that's what we were trying to do, is correct those negative images. And all of us were trying to answer, well, what is a black film? And we never could come to an agreement on what is a black film as such, but you know, there were earlier films that people like Oscar Micheaux made, you know, and they had a black film industry, and I think Oscar Micheaux was one of the first independent producers who really created the notion of
Black cinema.
Yeah, black cinema, but forewalling. You're getting money to make a film and then taking it around to different communities and showing it, you know. And so that was one of the starts. But you never hear about Oscar Micheaux unless you go to a film school or something like that. And the film school has to be progressive in order, because UCLA didn't show Oscar Micheaux's films until almost never, in a sense. It wasn't until a person who grew up in the South, who saw Oscar Micheaux's films, recommended to the faculty at UCLA when they first started showing that there was a cinema long before, you know, black exploitation films were. But anyway, I'm taking too much time, but anyway.
I think on the question of distribution for Killer Sheep originally, there's the problem that follows it is this kind of music clearance, because Charles, obsessed with music in his youth, was throwing songs that reflect his community onto the movie.
Like Earth, Wind, and Fire.
Exactly, reasons. And the film can't be severed from the music within it. I think that's such an important part of it. And I think the extraordinary cost to clear the music is something that frightened people to release it. I think that when we think of the question of distribution, Killer Sheep premieres at the Whitney in 1978. And to a sold-out crowd.
Where did it premiere?
The Whitney in New York. And to a sold-out crowd. And it just kind of becomes this thing where people are sharing the film, the 35 millimeter prints around. And so it circulates that way. But even as wide circulation, and it's being heralded so deeply, that doesn't move an industry who, the same year, 1978, is the same year that The Wiz comes out.
Yeah.
And the industry is saying, we're no longer investing in black cinema. The Wiz is the most expensive picture up until that point, expensive musical up until that point, excuse me. And that becomes a crisis because they have Michael Jackson, they have Diana Ross, they have all these stars in The Wiz. And when it's a financial failure, they get the, Sidney Lumet, they get the, what they imagine the best that they can do for this film. But of course, to your question, and something that you're alluding to, The Wiz was not marketed in black neighborhoods. it was marketed solely for whiteness, because when we think about the construction of Hollywood, we're thinking about how do we export blackness to white people, not how do we make black films to circulate in a neighborhood. So when we think about a film like Killer Sheep and its importance, and Sight and Sound named it the number 42 in their decennial poll of the most important films of all time, only outranked by Spike Lee for for black films, yes. And I think the question of how does a film like Killer Sheep circulate and how does it meet its moment, Hollywood was never willing to answer that question.
So as a follow-up to that, when you came on board to, was it Criterion? Did you help loosen that up and get the rights cleared so that we could get DVD releases of the film? Somebody came to the rescue and cleared up that the music rights issue.
Well, one of the things is, let me explain the rights to the film, the music rights. When you're a student, you can make whatever film you want to, as long as you don't exploit, music that's published, and if it and so I made the film, and I didn't care about getting the rights to it. I should have, and I tried to get it, but I didn't. And so trying to get distribution was very hard because I had to have gotten the rights, and so it stayed in the can for years and years and years until, Milestone was really helpful in getting the rights, and they paid a fortune to get the rights to it. And because once you got something married to the film, they have the publishers have you by the tail, so to speak, and it's very hard to negotiate the rights at that point. I should have got it earlier when I made the film, but I never knew the film was going to get distribution, or theatrical distribution, and so I didn't bother with it. And so it stayed in the can, but it did get a limited distribution through Pearl Bowser, who was a lady who distributed Oscar Michaud's films, and Oliver Franklin, who was a person in Philadelphia, who also made a tour of black independent films. And I think what was really critical in getting the distribution was people from Europe came over, like Uri Greger, Art Hesseling of Amsterdam came over and brought the films to Germany and to Amsterdam and places like that. And that's when it became a national distribution, when the film festivals in Europe embraced our films, And before that, there was a big festival in LA called FilmX, and they were only interested in Hollywood films, and films that were, they didn't have very many people of color having their films shown in FilmX, because they were competing with Hollywood, and they wanted, Hollywood films. And so eventually, FilmX was on for a number of years, and a number of people of color films screened there got smaller and smaller and smaller until there was none, So there was some in distribution, and there was a lady by the name of Mamie Clayton, a black woman who tried to archive these films, and she put them in her garage, and she got one of my films and put it in the garage, but they weren't really shown. It was people like Oliver Franklin and Pearl Bowser who really kind of got our films in the market. And, that's how it started.
I think, so the path that follows is in 2007, Killer Sheep comes out for the first time with most of the music rights cleared, except the final song. And Dennis and Amy, as Charles is saying, of Milestone Films, do the work of doing that. I think it's also important to note, as Charles is also saying, that in 1981, Killer Sheep plays at Berlinale. 1981, Killer Sheep plays at Berlinale, and it wins the Critics' Prize at Berlinale, which does change the fate of the film and how it circulates. But people, again, still not willing to invest in ultimately clearing the film until 2007. And so that release in 2007, I think is interesting because Namibia comes out the same year that Killer Sheep name of the film that was shown yesterday, comes out the same year that Killer Sheep is cleared, and it's having this life. That same year, in Film Comment, which I think is also kind of interesting, Jay Hoberman writes about David Lynch's first film, which also it comes out in '77, and Killer Sheep comes out in '77, and is thinking about the two paths that these filmmakers have made, and how the industry was willing to move for David Lynch, and Charles is kind of left. I mean, it's taken care of by his community, but thinking about Hollywood, right? The construction of Hollywood is kind of not given the same treatment that David Lynch is, of course. But yeah, so the new restoration that I'm speaking of, just to fast forward to that, so it decided that it should be cleared fully. So before, when Killer Sheep was cleared for the first time in 2007, this is the complication of it all, music rights could not be cleared in perpetuity in regards to a film. So there was only about a 5-year window in which the music was cleared. So then it had to go out of print again. And so when Black Film Archive launches, and there's the question of where's Killer Sheep? Where's Killer Sheep? It's because it had to go out of print again. But since 2007, now music can be cleared in perpetuity for older films. So Killer Sheep is now cleared indefinitely, and now has a new 4K restoration, and is on disc and on a Criterion disc, which I was able to guest produce, and had a theatrical run with the new 4K. So, yes.
That is an amazing. Oh, I'm almost teary-eyed. That's got to feel like quite an accomplishment. So until we get this kind of wide access to films like Killer Sheep, the way that most people saw it, or excuse me, a lot of people saw it, was through universities and college campuses. And we know that institutions become the way that many films continue to garner an audience and gather an audience over the years, and decades, if you will. So with that in mind, can you talk a little bit about what institutional support has meant to you, or what that has been like in working with universities? I know I taught a class a couple of years ago called Hollywood Auteurs, of which I showed four actually, of Mr. Burnett's films, and asked Mr. Burnett to come and speak. And the university, to the best of their ability, made a big to-do, or as big a to-do as they could over it, and so on. So, no patting myself on my back, but that was an effort that I had to make happen at Chapman University in Orange County, if y'all can read between those lines. Talk a little bit about how institutions kind of facilitate both your progress and hinder it if need be.
Okay, thank you. There was a period when distributing foreign films and art films and student independent films was very popular at one point. But then that all came to an end. Like, there was a period when distributors weren't getting films distributed anymore for different. I mean, art houses started disappearing, and so that was a problem because of that. And then there's kind of like not as big as it were in the early 70s and 80s, but I think it's coming back. I think we're getting some sort of recognition. But again, it's all about money, and at the films, they never look, and it was this whole thing again, when you try to go to a producer, distributor, whatever it is, there was always this thing about, well, these films don't sell, and I remember trying to get funding from CPB, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, to do a film, and they kept, they invited me to submit a proposal, a film, and I did. And it was Actually, it was Asleep with Anger that I proposed. And they kept sending me back things that, that they kept wanting to correct. They wanted to change. They wanted to take all the things that were dealing with black people out of it, in a sense, And particularly the fact that I had, this poor people from the South talking about their experiences and things like that, and they wanted to get rid of those people in the film and just concentrate on the middle class black people, and I said no. So we kept arguing back and forth, and how they pay you is that they give you a percentage of what they're going to pay you, and so if they don't like what you do, and they're supposed to send you this when you send then your treatment, or what it is, the thing, they pay you on what you do, but they kept saying to me, well, when asking for the check, because you depend on it, they said, well, it's upstairs, and okay, so you send them another thing and make little corrections, and I said, well, where's my check? Well, it's upstairs, and you want to say, well, where you go up and get it, and because it's that, but what it means is that I'm not going to pay you until you make these changes, and then you find that's what that means, and so and so you come to this point where you say, well, I don't want to make those changes. It's not about not about the film I want to make, and so they wrote me this really. But before that, they were making a film that Horton Foots had written, and it was about these people on the veranda talking about the past, And so I had a scene in my film where this older couple were from the South were talking about having left Mississippi or whatever it was, and so they wrote back and said, oh, this is too long, or it doesn't make any sense, and I said, well, Horton Foote just delivered a film like that, was shown on PBS, and they said, well, you're not Horton Foote, and they wrote me a letter, and I said, okay, I'm taking my film back, and they said, well, you're not going to be a writer, you're not going to be anything, and it really, I should have saved the letter. Let me jump to another part, because it's sort of like poetic justice at the end. I was in Africa making this film that we saw the other day, and so I got a call from in the States saying, you won an award, and I said, oh, great. And he said, but you have to be here to get it. I said, but I'm in Africa, it'll take 14 hours to get back and all that stuff. I said, well, no, we have to be here. Okay, so I'm getting kind of upset. I said, well, I can't be there because it's such a long way, and I got to be here to finish this film. And so we would carry on this conversation back and forth. And so I said, well, what is the award? And I said, it's a Horton Foote Writing Award. And I said, I'll be there. I said, I'll be there. And I came all the way back, and we had this big auditorium with people, and I spoke at this conference with writers, and I told them about how I comment on Horton Foote, and I was writing the scene very much like him, and the whole audience got up and clapped and all that sort of thing like that. So it pays to stick to your guns, Anyway.
I love that. I want to add something and I can't speak for Charles, but just something that I've observed is that Killer Sheep is one of the most cited films of all time, like visually cited. And so I think the more I've gotten to know Charles and, the more I've gotten to know film in general, is that people often want a Charles Burnett film without Charles Burnett.
Yeah.
And I think the relationship to institution, to me, kind of mirrors that too. I think, when Black Film Archive first launched, if I could speak candidly, a lot of people were upset that I didn't consult them first. A lot of institutions were upset that I didn't think that that their place could be a suitable home for it. But they only like it because it's done. And institutions don't get things done. So
Wait. What did the kids on the block do today? This thing? Say that part again? That part?
And I think for me, and now my work has become quite duplicated across the internet. And now people are demanding my time so that they can duplicate the thing that I've done and volunteer and continue to volunteer to do, which I think is fair. Like, I think once you create something, it becomes a standard. You can't ignore that. But I do think the relationship to institution as a Black artist, as a Black curator, is always lopsided. I think that they want to claim you after you have created something that they feel worth claiming. And for me, it was very clear early on that Black Film Archive, and most of my work, has to be created of my own mind, because that's the only place that I will get it done. Like, it just won't ever. Once you consult an institution, they're like, well, we have this program, and this program has these goals. Can you change your work to fit these goals so we can get you funding? And I've had this song and dance across the nearly 5 years of being a public person, and it remains that Black Film Archive is solely mine. And it remains that because also there are very few things that exist that are solely for Black people. And of course other people can enjoy and look and view, but this is created with Black people in mind. And I think, as Charles is saying, sticking to your integrity, that's all you have. Once you sell it, who are you? What do you stand for? And I want to stand for my own values. So that's my answer to institution.
That's a great answer. I don't know that we know how you got involved in doing archive and conservation work and restoration work. Tell us, when you were 5 and you were watching Killer of Sheep, and my favorite scene of the little girl in the closet with the Barbie doll and Reasons playing in the background, that is my moment. I cry every time I get to that part of the film. Were you at 5 going, that's
No, it's really interesting. During the pandemic, I started becoming my family archivist. I think for Black American families, there is often a family archivist. And it's a great honor to be the person who people consult for family history. And I've always kind of had that inclination, like I'm the person who has the photo books, all of those things, like preservation is paramount for me. And thinking about putting an ethos behind that is what, like, starting with my family and expanding that to Black Film Archive felt like a natural thing. And now I'm able to work with filmmakers individually. I just volunteer. I just am saying, can I help you in any way? And taking all of the care first, and just ensuring that they have their needs met. Because I think the thing that is real is that often filmmakers are celebrated but not compensated. So people are like, well, I want to give you this thing. I want to, honor you in this way. But who is doing the work to ensure that they have what they need? And I think without wanting any public recognition of that, right? I just want to make sure that filmmakers have what they need. And I think to have an elder in your life is one of the most sacred things. And I feel very honored that Charles allows me to work with him as a distributor, as an archivist, as a friend, and friendship being the most important, right? Then honoring the needs of someone else before whatever you think that this person needs, that actually responding to their desires, even if it's not the thing that you would choose. So how do I get into archiving? It's because I care. I know it sounds like a non-answer, but it really is the answer.
It strikes me very much as a labor of love.
Yeah. And I feel, so Milestone, I've been gifted the Milestone films.
Can you just, if people don't know, tell us a little bit about Amy and Dennis and Milestone Films?
Amy Heller and Dennis Doros are the co-founders of Milestone Films. Amy came from New Yorker Video, which was one of the leading home video and theatrical distributors. But Milestone started 35 years ago, so this is 35 years ago. And Dennis came from Kino International, which is now Kino Lorber. And together they realized that there was a need that wasn't being fulfilled. And so they started off with silent films. That there weren't people who were specializing in silent films. And eventually they found their niche. They expanded it. And their question is, they always want to mess with the film canon. So whether that's, distributing silent films when people have moved on, and, digital is happening and is coming, or whether that's distributing films of color, because Milestone is a distributor of Ayoka Shinzira's films, of Kathleen Collins's films, of Bridget M. Davis's films, most of Charles Burnett's films, as I've said. And I think the credit is to Dennis and Amy, who really fulfill a need and think not only about, they don't think about capital first, which is what Charles is saying, that so often when things are presented to people, they're like, well, how's this gonna make me money? They're often saying, what can I do for this artist? And so when Black Film Archive launched, Dennis and Amy and I started talking every week. And that slowly evolved to, well, we want to retire. Do we think that we can give you this company? Do you want to be a film distributor? And now Milestone will be the largest Black-owned film distributor in the country. So it's very exciting. Yeah, and that's the skinny of it, I suppose.
Okay, I have, I'm ecstatic. I met them 3 years ago when I started working on a wonderful film called Bushman that, if you haven't seen it, check it out. It's kind of amazing. I promise you I will finish that article post-haste. But I'm intrigued by this idea of people asking you to kind of tone down the blackness. And I don't know how aware people are of this burden that's put upon Black storytellers to, tone down the blackness. So if you could, what does that feel like as a storyteller, as an archivist, as somebody who curates kind of a history and legacy of existence, a Black existence? What does that mean when someone says, well, because we know what that's code language for, which is we need you to make it palatable and commercial for white audiences, if not global audiences. But what is, I really want to know in your heart, and then we'll go to the audience, go to the floor, about what is that? Do people know that Black artists are told you have to be less Black? Yeah.
It sort of varies, because sometimes you get the opposite. Like, I've been to...
Can you make it more Black?
Yeah, you do. And I remember while you were talking, I was thinking, I got an agent. You got to have an agent or something like that if you're going to make some money in this business. And so she got me to go over to Warner Brothers to see about this guy had a film based on a Donald Goines novel. Donald Goines and Iceberg Slim did these sort of, they both learned how to write in prison, which is an interesting concept. Anyway, so I went to Warner Brothers to talk about a story of Donald Goines' life, because I thought it was very, very interesting, because he was one of these guys that went to prison, and he learned how to write, and he wrote some very popular novels about gangsters and stuff like that. And he knew about them because he was involved with them and stuff like that. But he got killed, and he and his wife got killed in a mysterious way. And the people that he wrote about thought he had revealed some of their crimes in a book that he written, so they got revenge. It was rumored that was the case. Anyway, so I was talking to this producer who's very popular now, and he wanted me to write a story about these drug dealers, and it was very vicious and very violent, and like I started film wanting to do just the opposite, talk about the people I knew and I grew up with that I respected, and nothing like that. I mean, people like that exist, but not on that level. So anyway, so I didn't like the idea that we were going to make another one of these, films that about exploiting Black people and their bringing hazard to the community or whatever. And so I started telling them, no, I don't want to make those kind of films, and I don't think Black people want to see those kind of films, And so this goes on, And so he calls my agent and says, well, I don't think Charles wants to make this film. My agent said, well, Charles, what about, I said, yeah, I kind of like to make the film about Donald Goines, but not the way he wants to make it, you know. So she said, well, go back and tell him what you want to make it. So I go back, and we're talking, and I swear, I was telling him about the film he wanted to make, and this voice came out of me that I had no control over. It's saying, in a sense, that why do you want to make this film again, you know? And so he calls my agent and says, he still doesn't want to make this film, okay? And so, you know, you're trained and shaped by, particularly the civil rights movement, what you're supposed to do as a filmmaker. But that voice came out, you know. I didn't want it. I wanted a job. I needed a job, you know. I had kids, and so I had to pay for them, you know, and go to school and all that stuff like that. And so, again, this voice came out and challenged him. Why do you want to make that kind of film, you know? And talking to a producer who, his name is on a lot of the films now, you know, and stuff. He's done very well. So, but for us independent, it's always a struggle, you know, because we're shaped by the things that we respect and want to do. And here, again, these people give you this, well, take this and like it and so forth. But it's their film. They're the ones who write it and so forth, you know. And so it's not your voice. And so you want to do, look, you know, I come from a community from the South. I respect them. I know what they've gone through, you know. I mean, here's one reason I keep using this analogy, because one of the things I like about the community I live in, older people, particularly men, would say, you know, boy, stay in school, you know. And I think that, and I look back on that and say, that's a person who really cares about you if he tells you something like that, you know. And so a lot of the working class people in my neighborhood had that vision for us as kids, you know, go stay in school and get a diploma, you know. And so, you know, that's the kind of people I want to write about, you know, people who talk about, you know, making life better, not only for you, but for the community, you know. And so, and the LA Rebellion was about filmmakers making films that respected, you know, the community. And so, and one of the things I liked about showing your films in Europe is that that's one of the things that they always say, why can't we see more films like this, you know? And you say, well, these people in Hollywood say you don't like these kind of films, and I remember I was at this conference in Indiana. It was basically an all-white audience there, you know, and it was showing Killer Sheep and or some film I did, and the people in the audience was saying again, well, how come we don't see films like this? And the people at CPB was there sitting behind me, and I said, ask them, because they're the ones who said you don't like these kinds of films. And the people said, well, they never asked me, you know, ask them. They said, of course not. But they always have this thing that, you know, the Asian community doesn't like it when they show them in Japan. You know, they can't make any money. You know, but then when you show your films there, they say, well, how can we not see these films? You know, it's amazing how everything gets distorted, and it's from their perspective and view that they judge everything. You know, the producers. You know, and I tell you one of the things. You know, highly screened this film, Sankofa, in New York, and upstate New York? No, it was upstate. It was in Manhattan, but and it outgrossed Batman, you know, but they never published what the film grossed, you know, because they didn't want to embarrass Batman, you know, which was a studio film and millions of dollars, and the Hiley's film was, you know, struggling to get money to finish the film, you know. And so it shamed him. It would shame them if they would have published how much the film made, you know, and compared to what Batman did, you know. But anyway, those are the kind of things you have to face when you're doing independent films, particularly films that have meaning and serves the community and changes your attitude about what black family life is like, you know, because, you know, you get these strange comments from people who, you know, they don't see who we are, you know, because it's distorted through Hollywood. Anyway, that's my whatever.
I think And also if I think about the arc of Charles's career, I think that, like I was saying earlier, that Hollywood, I mean, his one of the most visually sighted directors. Hollywood is often trying to construct visions of his work without citing his work directly. That it's impossible to think about film history since especially his earliest films, and not go through him. And so this kind of antagonism of Black cultural production versus Hollywood's idea of what Black cultural production should be. But the antagonism I feel as a curator and an archivist, to answer your question, I think for me, it comes down to, and why I keep myself at a distance, which was your question, it comes down to self-preservation, really. It comes down to knowing that if I can control the conditions of which I collaborate with institutions, then I'm able to do the work I am set out to, like that I feel that is my purpose. Because I think as an archivist, there's different things that I must do than as a distributor. As a distributor, I must work with institutions. Archives, have film elements that universities have film elements as well, So, and it's not that I mind. I think, collaboration is really important. But are we all servicing the same mission? And really the first thing I do when, we have a kickoff call about a film or a project is, what are our shared goals? How can we start that we're walking in lockstep? Because I would hate for us to go further down the line and you misstate my intentions on the work. You misstate the artist's intentions because really the artist is who we're actually serving, not our own egos, not our own. A situation happened recently, actually, where I was unearthing a film, and I'll just keep this all nameless, but I was unearthing a film, and I needed to get it scanned. And I talked with this institution that I've worked with before, and their first thought was, how can we make this part of our permanent collection? And because they wanted to be so associated with the work that has never seen the light of day, that they're like, well, first thing we must do is make it a part of our collection, because they wanted the sexiness of being named with the work more than they actually had the desire to support the work. And I think in that case, it is in the artist's best interest, of which I'm representing in this capacity, to say, actually, we must go in a different direction. Because if you only care about the end result, the actual dearth of work that it takes to get there, you don't have real interest in. And also, it's something that we're still figuring out what we're doing. So it's that kind of relationship that I'm often navigating. Though, of course, there's the opposite, where institutions feel so committed to the work, and I want to name that too, that they are like, oh, well, let's do this, let's do that. So everything, but it's equal and it's opposite.
Oh, thank you so much. I have a million more questions, but I'm going to pocket mine and ask if there are folks in the audience who have questions. I'll start with Mr. Skinner Myers in the back.
Thank you guys for today's
Nice, big, loud voice.
Maya or Charles, if you guys could talk about the recent restoration release of Annihilation of Fish.
Yeah.
From what I've read, after one bad review, when it first got released, it got shelved. And maybe chat about the journey of how it came back
Okay.
to the public.
Thank you for asking that, because that was a very peculiar film and how it was treated. It was written by a Jamaican, Tony Winkler. He was Lebanese Jamaican, which was quite interesting. And he was, he died, that's why he's in the past tense, a very wonderful person. He has a strange sense of humor. He looked like a person who would be a bank clerk or something, not in the film business. But he's written a number of books. Anyway, the film screened at the Toronto Film Festival, and it got a great ovation, and they really loved the film and so forth. But I had made enemies with Pierre Ricien, who programs films at the Cannes Film Festival. And we got every time I met with him, basically we had like almost fights, you know. And he wanted to promote Lena Broca's film. And so we got an argument over that. And because he said, well, this is the best filmmaker in the world. You know, and I was with Hailey and people, you know, like that, and you know how boisterous he is and so forth. And so we felt we were being attacked. And so I left a bad taste with Pierre Ricien. Okay, so he was a good friend of Todd McCarthy, one of the critics and the reporter. And Todd McCarthy was there at the festival at Toronto, but he wrote a very bad review, we think, because I made enemies with Pierre Ricien. And Pierre Ricien wanted to, it was a long story and a very nasty fight, we had argument. And anyway, so Todd McCarthy wrote this awful review. Even the critic at the reporter apologized for Todd McCarthy's viciousness. And so we were just about to get a distribution deal with, I forget the studio then, and so they canceled it, and because Todd McCarthy wrote this awful review. And so the film was left in the can for just recently, I can't think of how.
Yeah, about 20 years.
Or something.
Yeah, 23 years, yeah.
Well, I tell you what, the interesting thing was, we filmed the film, I mean, we screened the film the day the World Trade Center went down. And we were invited to go to screen the film in some place near San Diego. And the producer and I rode down together, and we thought it was going to be canceled because of the date and so forth. So we got there was 2 auditoriums full of people, and we were like shocked that they came. And so after the film was over, there was great applause and everything. I asked, I said, why, you know, this thing happened today and you're here? And in both audiences said, well, we wanted to be with somebody, you know. And so they really loved the film, you know. And everywhere we screened it since then, it's been popular, you know.
Definitely.
And so forth. And so, but this one, Todd McCarthy wrote this awful review, and it killed the film up until then, yeah.
I want to add that the way it was able to come into distribution via Milestone recently was the producer had a bankruptcy filing, and this is actually a film that was bought out of bankruptcy. So that's a part of the distribution process as well. So buying it out of bankruptcy and then doing a restoration at its first formal release. And it really, and to Charles's point, has had a great showing. The New York Times named it one of the best films of 2025. And so it really has come into its moment 25 years after it was supposed to premiere.
Why don't I just move from the front to the back? How about that?
Can you repeat the name of the film? Annihilation of Fish. It has James L. Jones, Margot Kidder, and Lynn Redgrave, yes.
Annihilation of Fish.
It's on Canopy. It was the most watched film on Canopy or the 3rd most watched film on Canopy last year.
Check it out on Canopy, but you can also see it, I think, on Amazon.
Yes.
Yeah, good.
I just like to make one comment about the actors, because they were so wonderful. James L. Jones and Lynn Redgrave, particularly Lynn Redgrave, because she was going through some bad situation. And she came every day to work and left all the problems, you know, at home. I mean, she had some really awful things that, you know, I wouldn't go into this personal, but she was really wonderful to work with, both James L. Jones, and that's and they can spoil you because they're so good. I worked with Mary Alice and people like that, and they were all, I had the good fortune of working with some really talented people, and they make it work for you, you know, and so every chance I get, I would comment on how good it was working with those guys. Because I worked with some bad people before. You know, and I mean, to tell you the point, you said, I don't want to work with film, and I don't want to be in this business, you know. I mean, but you lived through it. But anyway, yeah. But I like to comment on her because she was on an airplane coming back, and the stewardess had a copy of the reporter, and I think she read out loud or something like that, and Lynn Redgrave was there, and she, I mean, but she knew she liked the film, and everyone else did too. So, you know, but she died and didn't get a chance to benefit from or enjoy her fruits of labor and so forth. So, yeah.
Hi, great panel here. I'd like to ask what you think of the status of Black independent film. I'm seeing proliferation of Black independent film in Black urban centers like Atlanta, Detroit, where I'm based.
Atlanta's huge.
And what the importance of Tubi is as a platform, and maybe some of the limitations on Tubi as a platform.
No, you can hit it. Okay. I tend to go on and on.
I have many thoughts about this. History tells us that in any moment that Hollywood is having a crisis, that Black independent cinema has a moment of rebirth. And if we think about, you know, Spike Lee's making films in the late 80s and 90s after, you know, all that Hollywood was producing was the buddy cop films and the Black independent move that happens through Miramax and other places in the 90s. I think that present day, there is an over-reliance on Hollywood as a institution to make cinema. I think in a way that I think we're at a breaking point with how people are saying, oh yeah, we can maybe finance this ourselves. Like, I'm seeing a lot of those conversations happening. Yes, Tubi is an important arm of distributing self-produced films, but those are self-produced, cheaply made, and kind of made for a Tubi audience, which is a very specific thing where Tubi makes films, and not to say that these are bad, I mean, that's not what I'm saying, but Tubi makes films like, why did I text my ex 3? You know, this kind of. Yeah, they make 3 of them. So it's, if we're thinking about like Black art house films and that kind of, that's also is having a moment too, but Tubi and algorithmic thinking locks people into something, and they feed on what is popular through their algorithm. So that already has a bias towards a certain type of movie. And I think the future, though I'm seeing, is also that people are investing and making and producing work outside of that system, and sometimes crossing over into Tubi and other streaming services to make their work. So I think it is a very exciting time to answer your question, but I'm skeptical of any one platform being the savior or answer to what is happening. As Hollywood is suffering a true death right now, a death, not the final death, but a death. I think that a lot of my friends who are filmmakers are thinking about different models of distribution, different models of collaboration, different models of packaging. A lot of things are on the table in ways that echoes the 90s, in my opinion. So I'm very excited, but they're not yet come to pass. And if I can also speak candidly, I think last week, with the release of You, Me, and Tuscany, there was a lot of people saying, well, how can, you know, we must support this film, because if we don't support this, Hollywood won't make Black romantic comedies any longer. I think that's a kind of a fallacy, because Hollywood has shown us across time that they have no interest in making films until they're required to. And when we put our total weight of production into one way, we actually fail the possibility models that exist. And it's not to say that I don't think we should support it. I did see You, Me, and Tuscany on opening day, but it's only a part, it's a small sliver of the truth, if I can be quite candid. So that's, yeah.
Thank you so much for being
Well, let me try to answer that in a sense. Oh, I'm sorry. I keep forgetting this thing exists. Anyway, I don't know what I have against mics. I was asked to do a film I was really interested in doing, Robert Smalls, and about him. He was during the Civil War, just prior to the Civil War, he stole a boat called the Planter, one of the fastest boats at the time, and he took it up the Charleston River, and gave it to the Union Army, and it helped to end the Civil War in many ways. Anyway, it's a story about a man who was a former slave, and worked on the river, the boat, and was a heroic person, and stole this boat. He gave it to the Union Army, and he had to pass Fort Sumter, and it was shelled because it was, these, what do you call this? The cannons flying everywhere. 'Cause first of all, that they wanted to do the film cheaply as possible, and so I said, well, there's a scene where he passes the Charleston Fort, Fort Sumter, and cannonballs flying across the Charleston and aiming at him and everything. He had his boat full of people from Charleston, and anyway, so I was talking to them about the props and everything and the location, and Fort Sumter's still there, and so they were shooting cannonballs at him, and the first thing they said, well, we don't have any money for cannonballs. I said, well, how are you going to do a movie about the Civil War and not have cannonballs? Fly, that it was too expensive, with this was before AI, and you could do anything on AI just about, and so we go to that, and then this is a Netflix, and so we're talking about what is the film about, and it's obvious what the film is about. It's to read history, and so they were arguing about, well, we don't know and stuff like that, and they asked me, and they keep changing what it's going to be about, and so finally, they try to find something that resembles it in a certain way, and so they came out, well, it's like the Hunt for Red October, and I mean, it's like someone hit you in the gut with a cannonball, and so, as I'm really, and you say, what are you talking about? I mean, it's not about the Russians steal a submarine, a Russian submarine, and give it to the States. No, it's about a guy who grew up in slavery. It's a really interesting story, And then, and you say, this is how you see the story? There's a Russian stealing a submarine, and it's not like that. And you just wash your hands of it. You guys, we're not talking the same language, And if you go through things like that, where people offer you suggestions like that, you realize how bad films can be, because it's so easy to tell the truth, and it's a real story. It's really dramatic, and says a lot about black people getting to a position where they can control their own destiny in a certain way, And it's a heroic thing that they did. And those are the kind of things you run into. Every film that I've been involved in, it's always something coming from left field, trying to tell you how to make the movie different. It doesn't, and you walk away from it, and you get this a reputation of being a difficult person to work with. No, you just want to be a good writer and storyteller, and not put all this other trash in because you can't think of anything that's real and worth making a movie about. Because there's so many wonderful stories that took place during that period. Of black people being heroic people and things like that. And so that's the kind of stuff you have to work with, If you try to say, no, that's not what I want, this is what the real story is, give the man his his due. Those are the kind of things that frustrate you. You have to fight all the time. And today you say, no, I can't do this. Yeah.
Wow. One of my favorite questions is to ask, yeah, well, I got it, is to ask filmmakers, storytellers, what's the worst note you've ever gotten? You, sir. This will be our last question.
Couple of comments. First, I saw the evaluation of Fish at the Palm Springs Film Festival in Palm Springs, California.
Oh, yeah.
And then Red Ray was there.
Oh.
It's a funny film. It's a good film, very professionally done. So I recommend that you see it if you can.
Nice.
Secondly, it seems to me, and I'm just a consumer, so I don't know a lot about your industry, that the rub is a lot of times in Hollywood, they want purely entertainment. They don't want films with African Americans about history and struggles and all that sort of thing. It's not entertaining. And I don't know how you all negotiate that so that you can make money off of that and will take a chance. And films like 42, yeah, Jackie Robinson's been kind of incorporated into American culture and all of that. But there's so many other films, basketball, the first black basketball player and others and so forth, other hockey and so forth. But that seems to be a struggle that you all have had for generations or for decades in the industry. I applaud you for what you've done, but it seems like to be a project of art. Thank you.
Well, one of the things I would like to comment on, it kind of relates to what you're saying. Anyway, you know The Searchers with John Wayne? Searchers, yeah. And everyone thinks that's a great movie and so forth, you know, an art piece. You know. Yeah. The Searchers.
John Wayne.
And yeah, and I used to see it all the time. And in film school, they'd say, "Oh, it's a great film. You have to see it." You know, and so okay, so it's given that credit, you know. And so I happen to be sitting next to a Native American, you know, and I saw it in her eyes for the first time. And I was sitting there, and she was sitting right next to me. And when the film, the scene when, was it Tab Hunter, or who was the guy who goes with John Wayne trying to find this young girl that was kidnapped, and she parks herself next to Tab Hunter. She's under this blanket, you know, and he wakes up and he sees her next to him. And he kicks her down the hill, you know, and this lady sitting next to me jumps up and just storms out of the theater, you know. And I didn't realize until I saw her what she saw, you know. It was one of the most racist scenes you've seen, and how he thinks about looking at the Indian scar, and this shot of him below shoots John Wayne with his blue eyes just staring at the scar, and one of the most, it's the most personification of hate I ever seen. I mean, she's an actor, but it was like, you said, this guy is for real here, you know, and things like that are promoted in film as art, you know, like Birth of a Nation. Well, every time I look at Birth of a Nation, I have to crawl out of the theater, you know, things like that, you know. And say, can't you see this, you know, what it's done, you know, and particularly when they distort one of the most progressive periods in American history, you know. Anyway. I get off on this.
I think I want to add, and I know it's the final word. I want to add that I don't think that Hollywood must be a prison that artists crawl out of, that there is another way of creating. And I think Charles is proof of that creation is possible. And so I hope that we don't, I know what you're saying, because like Hollywood has the money and the control, but there is other ways to have money, perhaps not control, but should the artist hold the lever of control? That's my last thought. Thank you all so much. So grateful.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone, for a fantastic morning, and please enjoy the rest of the conference.
Yes.